Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen on air and live or online at any of your podcast locations, such as Audacity, iHeartRadio, RadioNet, or wherever you do your podcast listening. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I am so happy to have as our guest, Gary Adelman. He is a certified Alexander Technique teacher and has been teaching the technique in private practice for 30 years. He studied at the American Society for the Alexander Technique and has been in private practice for many decades. He also completed a 3-year Alexander Technique teacher training program at the Alexander Technique Center and also a 1-year postgrad study at the Alexander Technique School of Shaike, Hermelin in Tel Aviv, Israel. So he has taught this method at Princeton University, the Omega Institute, and the Israeli Tennis Center, as well as many other places. So thank you so much for joining us today, Gary.
Oh, thank you so much, Ellen, for having me on the show.
So let's go back in time, because I'm sure many people have never even heard of the Alexander Technique, and yet it's obviously a super serious study with all the different places that you have gone to learn it.
Yeah, the Alexander Technique is a way of teaching people how to use their body in the most natural, effortless way. And it was developed by this man, F.M. Alexander, a Shakespearean actor from Tasmania, Australia, in the late 1800s. And the technique is really teaching people how to use their body kind of naturally. And the idea is that when we were all young little infants, we had beautiful use of our body. If you look at little infants crawling around, they make their movements look really easy and coordinated. And then as we get older, we kind of use that natural, effortless use of our bodies. So this technique is about recovering or rediscovering what we already had as young children.
So I have heard about it for years. It's really, not new at all. What was your path to finding the Alexander Technique?
Well, my path was kind of interesting. In my younger years, I was a professional tennis player, playing tennis professionally all over the world on the pro circuit. And at a certain point in my playing career, I was in a bad slump. And I got very depressed because I wasn't winning or earning money. And I was very stressed out. And I had a girlfriend of mine, and she suggested, why don't you take a few lessons in the Alexander Technique? Maybe it'll help to reduce your stress and you'll feel better. So I took 3 lessons in the technique from a teacher in New York City, and private lessons. And after the 3rd lesson, I felt as if all this stress that I had been under for the past year with my tennis playing, the stress was gone. And I went out and played tennis, and I played better than I had in years. And so then I was hooked on this technique. I thought, oh my God, I have got so much from it. I have to really study it and learn more about it and learn how to teach it and help other people to feel the way that I was feeling. And that's when I got interested in learning how to train as a teacher of the technique.
Now, why is it called a lesson rather than a therapy? Like if someone were to come to you, they're not getting an Alexander therapy, they're getting an Alexander Technique lesson. So why is it described that way?
That's a really good question, Ellen. The reason is because it becomes a practice when you study it. It's like a practice in mindfulness of how you use your body, all the time. So when you're eating, when you're sitting, when you're standing, when you're lifting something, you're always using your body in a certain way. And so you have an opportunity to really apply the technique to your daily activities. So it's kind of a a self-help daily activity mindfulness practice as opposed to just something that's therapeutic.
So it's something that when someone comes for a lesson, what goes on?
So a typical traditional Alexander lesson is we have two parts to the lesson. The first part is called chair work. And that means the person that I'm working with is standing in front of a regular chair, and I'm at their side, and I give the person some verbal cues, some verbal suggestions about how they could be holding and using their body. At the same time, I put my hands on them. Typically, I would start off putting one hand at the base of their skull and the other hand maybe on their forehead. And then I would somehow, this is what takes a lot of training, I'm able to communicate a different way for that person to hold and use their body just by touching them and communicating a new message to their body through touch and through verbal cues. And so then I'd have them stand up, and then I'd guide them into sitting down into the chair as I keep my hands on them. And then I might have them move forward and backwards in the chair a little bit. And then I might have them stand up and sit down a few times. And that's the chair work part of the lesson. And I'm trying to show them as I do this chair work how they can use their body in a totally different way than they would ordinarily be able to do it on their own. And then the second part of a lesson is you have the person lie down on a massage table on their back. They're fully clothed. And then I get a chance to work with different parts of their body. Like I might start at their head and neck, and then I would work with one shoulder. I have my hands on the front of the shoulder and the back of the shoulder, the right shoulder, the left shoulder. And then I might work with their arms and take their arm out to the side and teach the person how they could really lengthen their arm out so that it's not all contracted and it really starts to elongate out of their back. And then I might have a work with their legs and lift their legs and move them a little bit. And then after the table work, that I might have them come back and do a little bit more chair work. And then that's the end of the lesson. Typically, a lesson lasts about 45 minutes or so, private lesson.
So it's not massage.
Correct.
And however, it sounds like in a way it is hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
So I know with some other therapeutics, you actually need some kind of license in order to actually do hands-on, such as a massage therapy license.
That's right. Most states allow people who teach the technique to teach without a massage license. There are like one or two states, I think Florida requires people to have a massage license if they want to teach the technique. But the other states, mostly just having a certification is enough for the states to allow you to legally practice the technique.
So, and it sounds like from your bio that that's not such an easy task. But let me reintroduce you to our listeners. Herbally Yours listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. And you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse. And today we are talking about Alexander technique. And it might be something you haven't heard of before. If that's the case, listen on and tell your friends that our shows are, of course, live on air, but also available on our archive, where we also have information on how to get in touch with our guests. And in this case, Gary, you can find him at Alexander Technique with Gary. That's all one word, Alexander Technique with Gary.com. And you can always find yours truly, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, at naturalnurse.com. So, Gary, going back to Alexander technique, in your bio, you talk about, years of study.
Yes.
So it's not something that you can just say, I'm an Alexander technique practitioner, or not, or you can. Like, how do you become recognized?
Well, typically you have to go through a 3-year teacher training program which is pretty rigorous. It's 1,600 hours, and it's about 530 hours a year. And you go to school for like 5 days a week, weekdays, and you go to the school for about 3 hours a day. And then after you complete your 1,600 hours of teacher training, then you get a certification by the certifying organization called AMSAT. And then you're allowed to teach. And even after you get your certification, you still, as a teacher, want to continue to study and learn more about the technique. And it's endless how much you can really keep discovering about the technique, and realize, even after many years of teaching, that there's so much more to go.
So it's very serious. It's a very serious study. You're talking about that you have to attend those classes in person. Yes. Which means you have to live by the school. You're not doing it. I wonder if they've switched now, like the rest of the world, to where you can do some of the studying virtually.
I think there might be a couple of schools that do something that way, but I think most of them still do it where you have to go to the school in person.
Well, of course, there could be a hybrid, because there's a lot of theory and all that perhaps you could learn virtually. I mean, this is going on in nursing schools now, even, I'm a nurse. And a lot of nursing schools now, they've actually made their entire program so that you can do it virtually, but you must also have one-on-one in-person training. So they're having nurses go sometimes to their local hospital, which works with whatever school they're in, so that they can do things that are physical, like put in IVs and, that kind of thing. So it's interesting how much of the world is switching to that, because you're talking about that you were there such a long time. I mean, that's a major investment. People would have to move to where there is an Alexander Technique school. And how would one find those schools?
Well, there's two organizations that accredit the schools. One of them is called AMSAT, AMSAT, and AMSAT/Alexander Technique. And then if you go to the AMSAT website, it has a listing of all the schools that are accredited that are around the country. And I don't think there's that many schools. There's maybe 11 or 12 schools that are accredited throughout the country. And then there's another accrediting organization called Alexander Technique International. And they have, I think, a few schools that they certify also.
So that would be how you got to the one in Tel Aviv.
Right, exactly. Yes, the Tel Aviv one, a school that I went to for a year after I graduated from my school in Cambridge, Massachusetts, is interesting because in Israel, there's a huge demand for Alexander Technique. There must be something like 300 teachers in Israel. And, there's probably like 5 or 6 schools there.
Wow. So I wonder why. That's really interesting. Somehow it grabbed a hold there, and must be very useful because they have a stressful life like all the time, with bombs and raids. And
Exactly. I think one of the reasons that it's popular there is because there's so much stress there, and the technique is really good at helping you to manage your stress. So people tend to gravitate towards something like that.
Well, when someone comes to visit you, and your office is in Glen Cove, by the way,
yes,
for our listeners who are local in the Long Island area, which, of course, Gary, we have listeners from literally all over the world nowadays, because once it's a podcast, it's not local, but yet we're broadcasting right here out of Nassau Community College at 90.3 WHPC. So we have a lot of local listeners also. So is there a point like you take lessons, you call them lessons rather than, let's say, therapeutic treatments,
mm-hmm.
and then does someone have to continue to get those ongoingly, or do they learn how to initiate some of these changes themselves?
Oh, people do it all different ways. I've had people, I have one man that's been studying with me for over 25 years. And, he continues to come regularly. I have people that are coming for 8 or 10 years, and they come weekly. And then I have other people that come, let's say, for 4 or 5 times or 10 times and they feel like they got what they were looking for, and they don't really continue. So it all depends on, what your goals are from, learning the technique.
I know you do this, you have a home studio, and I'm just wondering if you happen to personally know there's this absolutely beautiful place that recently opened in Glen Cove, and it's called Buddha Jams. Did you ever hear of it?
No, I haven't heard of that.
And it's like amazing. A man took over 5,000 square feet under a shopping center right on Glen Street.
Mm-hmm.
And he created this place. You should probably look at it, because I was just getting this vibe that it would be wonderful if you ever do a public lecture or a public presentation. He has this absolutely incredible space that he's using both as a yoga studio, a music recording studio, and an event place for different things to go on, even big musical events.
Wow, that sounds great. I'll definitely check that out for sure.
Interesting person. He actually is the producer of a lot of very big music events, such as the Clearwater Revival, which used to go on. You might remember, because I went to many of those.
Right.
So I just could see you giving this kind of session about Alexander technique to the public in that beautiful space. So that's why I'm throwing it out to you. Mm-hmm. And so how does it go if someone comes to you? Like, what is a typical, let's say, lesson look like?
Well, I was saying before that the lesson typically lasts about between 45 to 50 minutes. And I was mentioning that, we do chair work and table work. And sometimes we do additional kinds of activities besides using the chair and the massage table. For example, sometimes people will want to study the technique because they want to improve their performance at a particular activity. As an example, I've worked with many musicians, and oftentimes even holding a particular instrument, let's say a violin, creates a lot of stress in the person's neck and back and shoulders. So that person might come because they're in pain and they're stressed out from playing, their instrument, and they want to learn how to use their body better so they don't get, the stress and tension that they're accumulating. And so then that person they may come, and I might, half the lesson, I might just work with them at their, using their instrument and telling them and showing them how they can use their body in a much better, more natural, effortless way.
So that's a good example, because I think anyone could visualize using a violin definitely stresses out some particular muscles.
Exactly. Right.
So when you're doing this intervention, is it only with one-on-one, or do you do groups? I
do groups as well. And other teachers do groups also. It's done both ways. I kind of specialize in doing it one-on-one, but sometimes I do groups, and I also do a lot of group talks, at the local libraries and senior centers and things like that. Groups are really good for introductory classes, but if you really want to learn this technique in a deeper level, then I would suggest trying to do it one-on-one with the teacher, because each person has their individual issues, and it's hard to address an individual issue within a given group.
And so it's individualized. It might be different programs for different people in terms of Alexander technique.
Yes. So the basic idea is that people really misuse their bodies at every single activity that they do. And when they misuse their bodies, there's a pattern that's pretty universal. And the pattern is that they tend to stiffen their neck and push their neck forward in space. At the same time, they pull their head back and down into their neck, and they compress their whole spine downwards. Now, how that actually manifests in a given person can change a little bit. Some people will be tighter in the neck. Some people will pull their head back and down more. Some people will pull down in the front of their neck. So each person, you have to individualize and tailor your instruction to that given person that you're working with.
So it's not a massage. It's more like
not a massage. No.
So you're like repositioning how they hold themselves. And then when you switch that, it must really tell your muscles because you might feel that change.
Yes. If you think of like a great performer of any discipline, let's say these great ice skaters. I love watching these figure skaters during the Olympics as an example. And you look how effortless they make what they're doing seem. But then if you went out and tried to skate like that, you'd fall on your face, doing all these jumps and everything. You realize it's not easy, but they make it look easy. So the idea is to learn that quality of ease, to embody that quality of ease, and then to take that quality into all your activities so that everything that you do becomes easier and actually more enjoyable to do and is more in accord with how the body's supposed to work.
So I guess once you do it often enough, it retrains your system so that you don't have to consciously put it back in that less stressful mode. It would just sort of go there automatically.
Yeah, that's a great comment. That's right. A lot of this that you're learning from the private lessons or the group lessons will stay with you, but sometimes you forget. So you can remind yourself. So that's why I say that this is kind of a mindfulness practice, because even the fact that I'm studying for 30 years this technique, still there are times during the day that I forget, particularly when I'm really engaged in some activity and I'm like absorbed in what I'm doing. And then I forget about how I'm holding my body. So I have to kind of remind myself and come back to myself and say, wait a second, I kind of lost touch here. Let me think a little bit about the technique and the principles of it. So I have better use of myself. So
you have a refresher within yourself as well.
Right. So the idea is eventually you become your own teacher, and you kind of, you need your regular teacher less and less, and you can teach yourself.
Well, is there a way you could talk us through like a little bit of an exercise?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I like to do in my groups is this particular exercise, which has to do with sitting. So many of us are sitting a lot during the day, particularly looking at computer screens. And usually when we sit at computer screens or just sit in general, we misuse our bodies. And the typical misuse that you would see with people that are sitting is they tend to slump down. And when they slump, they basically take their whole pelvis and they tilt it backwards so that they end up sitting on the bottom of their spine. And that part of the spine is called the tailbone or the coccyx. And that part of the spine is not designed to bear all your weight. So you don't want to sit on your coccyx. So in order to begin to sit more properly, you want to think of coming a little bit forward from your tailbone and think of sitting on your sit bones. And the sit bones are these two bones on the bottom of your pelvis that are designed for you to sit on. That's why they're called sit bones. And if you don't feel them, you could rock back and forth on your sit bones, and eventually you'll feel these hard bones at the bottom of your pelvis kind of pushing into the chair beneath you, and then you know that you're at the right spot. So first you need to come forward a little bit onto your sit bones. And then you would start to send some messages from your brain to your body. And the first message that we always send is to the neck. So you send a message to your neck, and the neck message is you ask your neck to be free. That doesn't mean you try to totally relax your neck or move it around, move your head around or anything like that. You're just sending a message and allowing your body to respond. And then the next message is to the head, and you're going to ask your head to be freely balanced on the top of your spine. Now, typically people pull their head back and down into their neck, into their spine, and we don't want to pull it back. We want it to be freely balanced, freely poised on top of the spine. And the spine goes way up high, much higher than people think. It goes up actually behind your nose is where the joint of where the head meets the spine is. And so you're thinking at that point of your head just freely balanced on the top of your spine. And then you're sending a message to your whole spine to elongate and to particularly lengthen upwards. And you're going to think of your whole back, your whole torso widening out, spreading out to the sides. And you're going to think of your knees releasing forward, away from your hips. And you might as well send a message to your feet, to your toes, not to grip the ground, but to undo. And then the final thing is the technique is so much about breathing, which we haven't even covered, but you remind yourself to breathe if you're holding your breath and thinking of particularly of your rib area really being free and released so that your whole rib cage can move and you can breathe more freely. So that's a typical example of how one might try to apply the technique to a particular activity.
So can people do this watching a video?
You mean, can they learn the technique watching the video? I don't think initially it would work very well, because really you're trying to change the person's kinesthetic sense. So we have 6 senses. We have the 5 senses that you know about, and the 6th sense is called the kinesthetic sense. The kinesthetic sense is the only sense that tells us about our bodies, where our bodies are in space, how our body, parts of our body are related to each other. And the kinesthetic sense is very unreliable. In other words, let's say that you're used to holding your head off to the side your whole life. So that eventually feels natural. So no matter what you do, you're going to tend to go back to your whole way of holding your head to the side. So you would need a teacher to kind of help to guide you to a better position, better direction of your head, so that you can you change your feeling sense. So we're trying to really change this kinesthetic sense so it becomes more accurate. So then you're getting more accurate information, feedback from your whole body.
Well, that makes sense. So I want to thank you so much for being our guest today. Listeners, you have been listening to our guest, and that is Gary Adelman, certified Alexander teacher, technique teacher. And you can find him. We have a live link. We will have it on our archive, but you can find him at alexandertechniquewithgary.com. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi, at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.